Welcome to the latest installment of the Run to Daylight show. I'm your host, Todd Burrows, and I am joined today by Neil Orefield at Player Q DFS. Neil has won $1 million. He's had a couple other big takedowns. Up until recently, he was gainfully employed by Stochastic, which, let's face it, it's awesome with some weird name. And Neil is going out on his own, and we want to find out a little bit about that. He's one of the guys that I really, really enjoy watching. His show with Scott Barrett every week during the NFL season was a must-watch show for me. And what I love about Neil is that even though he's super sharp, he doesn't mind letting the guests speak, which is something I am still trying to learn after about 8 years doing this. But I am really glad to have Neil aboard. We are going to be talking some high-level best ball stuff, and we are going to first talk about my friends over at the FFPC. I am choking so far today, but that's the way it is sometimes. The FFPC is where you need to play fantasy football this season. No salary caps, no DFS, no new formats to learn, just the pure drafting fun that you've learned for a year. The FFPC is home to not one, but two never too early best ball contests. I spend most of my time in the $125 one with a $25,000 grand prize. I just signed up for number 4. Or if you're looking for a contest with a 5-figure grand prize and just the $35 entry, the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament might be the contest you're looking for. They already have the main event and the 350 contest live. So if you love season long, it's all there. It's all out for you. Go to myffpc.com and join today. Neil, thank you for putting up with me stumbling through the wreckage of my ad read, and welcome to the show.
I told you before the show, I've never actually played on FFPC. So do they do slow drafts, fast drafts? What's the format there?
Well, you don't get as many fast drafts. They have both.
I like slow drafts. I actually do a lot of slow drafts. So
one of my big things it's going to be one of the questions, but one of my takeaways is it's way too easy to just draft and just to keep drafting.
Yep.
And the thing about slow drafts is if you really take the time and don't just draft from your phone, but you sit there and go through your options, who might be there for you next time, really give it 3 or 4 minutes before you make a pick. I think you can really gain an edge, because the temptation is just to show up and pick because you don't want to hold people up.
Yeah, no, it's the nice thing about slow drafts is, honestly, I don't really feel a ton of that pressure. You get 8 hours. I like to use, I try not to use the full 8 hours. Sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and it's like, oh God, I have very little time left. But yeah, in general, I like slow drafts. I think it's you can take your time. I don't worry too much. I feel like people sign up for the slow draft, so you can take your time to make your picks if you need the time.
We have the esteemed Jewish McCaffrey available in the chat, and glad to have him. And if any of you have any questions, this is a pretty easy show to just jump in, ask questions. And Neil, what does GM mean? I'm a boomer, and I didn't get the memo on that one.
It just means good morning. It comes from the crypto/NFT space. It was just the way that people greet each other in the mornings, but often in the afternoons also. Just means good morning. Typically used by NFT crypto people.
If it's crypto, it means I've just bought and at the top again. So
me too. Same experience.
I'm really glad to have you here, Neil. You've been a super successful DFS player, and I know most of my listeners will be familiar with you, but could you still tell us a little bit about you and your journey to this point?
Yeah, so I've been a pretty serious season-long fantasy player for decades at this point. I started probably mid-90s, I would guess, and always very competitive. Spent honestly probably too much time on my season long stuff, even when I didn't have much money or no money on the line. I was still very competitive about it, really enjoyed season long stuff. Started playing DFS. The way I tell it, I started playing in 2013. Now, my Roto Tracker actually tells me I apparently had some FanDuel action in 2011, but 2013, my younger brother invited me over to watch the Timberwolves. And I was like, I don't care about basketball at that time. Now I'm a huge Timberwolves fan. At the time, didn't care about the Timberwolves, didn't
Well,
know
once
anything
you're a
about them.
DFS guy, you know the degenerate life takes over.
Exactly. So at that point, that was what got me going in like 2013. I was like, well, I need a reason to care about these games. So I made a few FanDuel lineups at the time, just to give me something to cheer for as I was watching the Timberwolves. Of course, didn't even know who the players were. I was just read like an article, entered some of the players, and did horribly. And that continued for a couple of years. I was just like, I didn't really know the players. I would read articles here and there to kind of get an idea of who I wanted to play, and didn't have a ton of success early on. But yeah, after playing for several years, I of course started with basketball, but got into football, baseball. Now I play all the different sports, MMA, PGA, a lot of different stuff. I dabble in.
If there's a projection for it, you're in.
Largely, I mean, I still don't play all of them, and I'm trying to be more mindful of like what I actually am good at, what I actually know. Like I've started playing PGA again this year only because I can use Sims, because I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing with PGA, but the Sims do. So if I use other people's Sims to make PGA lineups, maybe I can try to have success there. But yeah, in general, if there's a projection, I'm willing to play it. But yeah, so I started 2013, started having real success around 2019. I think it was my first six-figure win, which kind of allowed me to, like, at that point I was still hand building. So that kind of allowed me to start using projections and more advanced tools in my play. And then I really got a lot more successful after 2019, after my first six-figure win, which then allowed me to go on and win the Millie Maker the next year. And started working at it was awesome at the time, like you alluded to, in 2020.
Well, with you not there, it is not so awesome.
I mean, I'm no comment. Yeah.
Or to be nice, less awesome.
Okay, yeah, that's a better way. Better, I agree with that. I'll agree with that. So around 2020, I started doing some content there. I reached out to Alex. He had maybe it was 2021 actually. Alex Baker, Awesemo, had posted that they were looking for new content creators in the NFL space. I reached out to him, said, hey, I haven't ever really done content before. I had just done, a 20-minute interview with Alex, and then a couple hour long one with Blenderhead were my only experience. So I don't really have a ton of.
I love him. He is.
Me too.
He is. You might hear the same thing 100 times, but he does what most good teachers do. He ensures that you stick to the basics before you move on to further things. He helped me a lot.
Yeah, I'll allude to Blender again soon. I think I've read through your comments or your questions for me, and I think that there are some that we'll get into talking about Blender a little bit more. Yeah, I'm big fan of Jordan. But yeah, so I had done
absolutely
just a spot there. I'd talked to Alex once, but I just told Alex, hey, I don't have a ton of experience with content. Like, this isn't really my background, but I love DFS and I'd like to get into it. And he basically told me, yeah, I mean, we think good players make good analysts at Awesemo. So if you're interested, and I end up doing weekly shows with them. Just that first NFL season, I was doing every Saturday strategy show. Started doing some live before lock for NFL Showdown shows. And then about a year later, I started full time at Stochastic. That lasted about a year and a half. And as of January 4th, let go at Stochastic. Started my own YouTube channel, started my own podcast, and here we are.
And tell people where they can find that.
Yeah, so I it is on if you go to my Twitter profile at PlayerQDFS, it is my pinned tweet. You can find, so it's on my YouTube channel, which is at NC Orefield 8K is the YouTube channel. Maybe I should change that. I don't know, but it's pinned to my my Twitter profile. You can find the YouTube link where if you want to join live, I'm doing this podcast live so people can join in, ask questions of my guests. But then I also have it up on all of the podcast streams.
All right. So you're doing a new podcast, And you seem like the type a very thoughtful person. So what are you trying to bring to your show that you think makes the most out of your abilities? Not that it has to be something completely unique, but just give the people a sense of what the Player Q DFS experience will be like.
Yeah, so I've always loved having kind of higher level conversations. It's fun to do a slate breakdown, talk about what's going to happen on tonight's NBA slate, this upcoming NFL slate, whatever. That's all fun. But I've always really enjoyed just the more high level conversations about
That's what I was hoping
strategy.
today would be.
Yeah, like just strategy approach conversations. It's all that it's something that I've always loved. So this is here where Blender comes in. So it was actually, I had been thinking for a while that this is something that I would be interested in doing, like a podcast where I interview a rotating guests that are high level players, high level like thinkers within the field. Has always been kind of something that I've wanted to do. So go back to maybe 2-3 years now. I was at that point just a contractor at Stochastic, and Jordan Cooper reached out to me and said, "Hey, Eric Beimfor is no longer going to do the Theory of DFS with me. He does a show, Theory of DFS."
Yeah, I know who Eric is. Definitely,
yeah.
I'm signed up at Spike Week.
Yeah, yeah. But Jordan does so he did the audio masterclass, Theory of DFS,
Yes,
and
and
does
I've taken I still have to finish it, but I definitely
honestly, I have not. I probably should. I even so
I mean, he
was his co-host.
gifted it to me, which was
Yeah,
nice of him.
yeah.
When he anyway. So your whole goal, if I could just kind of get you there, is to get really smart people and to talk advanced strategy, kind of the whole teach someone to fish. Rather, nothing bores me quicker than a show where everyone's in play. Right, like if you
Right.
want to,
Yeah.
if you want to lose me, and so is in play this week. You know what? I mean, even back when you couldn't get good projections in the industry, that used to piss me off, right? Now that I've got so much, if I pay a sub at any decent site, you've got so much power in your hands. I don't need to know that someone is in play. Like what Jordan does is for those who don't know, what Jordan does is he takes the strategy of the week. And I'll never forget, he was in the 1 week season chat one week, and he was all over the Colts. And it was a couple years ago when the Colts were awful. But the quarterback was cheap and all the weapons were cheap. And, he talked about the theory of why he was on them. He said, I know that they're not going to hit often, but if they hit, because all of you hate this play so much, that I have a good chance of taking down a tournament, and I only need to do that once a year to be profitable.
Yeah, he calls
it
them,
wasn't
I think,
much of a question,
puke stacks or something along those lines. Yeah, it's something that I've always loved, those kind of stacks. It's getting tougher as the field gets better. More and more of the field are playing those disgusting kind of stacks. It's becoming less of an advantage. But for a while, that was a clear way to exploit what the field is doing, because the field is like, I'm not going to play the Colts. I'm not going to play the Pirates in baseball, whatever it may be.
And the sites have gotten way better at pricing too.
Yeah.
A lot of the edge in football DFS has gone away with DraftKings, the way they've priced the last few years, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into best ball. The first question, I've been playing best ball very seriously for quite a while. The first question that I think we should discuss, from your DFS background, what is it that you have found that has translated the best from DFS, and what things haven't? And also, are there any things you thought would translate better than they have so far?
Yeah, I mean, I did a conversation with Eric Beimfor. We did a whole pod on like what you can bring from DFS to best ball. And I think there's a lot that you can bring from DFS
Absolutely.
to best ball, just from a from a lineup
And vice versa, by the way.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
My best year in DFS was the year I decided where it just kind of clicked that how many of the things I did in best ball could translate to DFS.
Yeah, it definitely goes both ways. We talk about the three levers that you pull or four potentially in DFS, which are projection. That's always something kind of comes into the rankings. Like rankings are largely based on a player's projection for the season. There is correlation. You're always stacking with your quarterback. At least I am. I'm always trying to stack pass catchers with my quarterback. That's similar both DFS and best ball. You're just trying to hit the maximum ceiling by if the quarterback goes off, the receivers are going to go off, and vice versa. There is also ownership is to some extent you can try to differentiate. Now it's a little bit different in best ball where 2/3 of your lineup are going to be 16% owned. Like they're going to be drafted in every single draft. Like that's just going to be what the ownership is. But then it's you can kind of factor in ownership by who is going to be, rookie wide receivers. A good example of like they're probably not going to be amazing in terms of helping you to advance. At least a lot of them are not going to do much during the regular season. So then by the time you get to the second round, which would be starting week 15, well, suddenly a lot of these rookie wide receivers are going to be lower owned and in good spots because they get better as the year goes on. So they might not really have high ownership in the playoff rounds because they didn't do that much to help you advance. But by then they've really carved out a role in their offense. They're ready to excel. So that's kind of an example of you're trying to factor in ownership. Well, it doesn't matter the first 14 weeks because you're the only person in your pod who has them.
But ownership also includes, once we get into the schedule, it also includes bye weeks. It also includes, different strategies for week 15, 16, and 17. And game stacks that so there all that does apply, just in a different way obviously than DFS.
Yeah, exactly. You're using a lot of the same thought processes in DFS and best ball. Sometimes you apply them a little bit differently. Another thing in best ball, I would say I am focusing on combinatorial ownership. Another a word that I learned from Blender, combinatorial ownership, who are going to be player combos that not many people are going to have in the field. It's another way you can kind of factor in ownership in best ball.
That's one Jordan drilled into my head. You get a stack with one person and they're both 15 to 20% owned. So you're in that range, but actually it was Zandamir who said you just add a third person to that stack and now you're in the 2 to 3% range. And I think probably that translates to best ball as well.
Yeah, for sure. Overstacking a little bit can certainly change your combinatorial ownership as well. So yeah, there's a lot of, and then even outside of just like within lineups, there's also bankroll management, something that can carry over from DFS to best ball. Contest selection, a lot of the same concepts carry over from DFS to best ball and vice versa.
All right. We have a good comment in the chat from a question, and we're going to get to that because that question is absolutely on the list. All right. So the other thing I was going to say on that is it also depends on the site. Before the show, Neil and I were talking about how he doesn't play FFPC, and I was telling him how 2 to 12 advanced just like every other site, but then it's 2 to 12 and 3 to 12 to get to a 70-man final. That puts in play not stacking your quarterback. And it's 20 rounds, so you can have 3 different quarterbacks. So knowing your site, is something that is a DFS strategy, Neil. But all the more, I think it is a really underestimated part of best ball. And we're going to get to more on that because that was Mr. McCaffrey's question. So what sites do you play on? What is your volume approximately for best ball? And how do the scoring differences affect how you would attack drafts on various sites? We'll just throw in his question now too, handle it all at once. What are your thoughts on drafting underdog versus DK? What share of each draft? So Mr. McCaffrey, you got my next question, so the table is yours, Neil.
Yeah, so I play the vast majority of my volume on Underdog. And honestly, I play much better on Underdog. So I play on Underdog, DraftKings, and Drafters are the three sites that I do play on. As I said, I vast majority of my volume is on Underdog. I think that as a result, I haven't been as good at DraftKings or Drafters. There are players. I remember last year there'd be players who I would like at their ADP on Underdog, and then I can see them on DraftKings 20 picks later. Like the ADP is 20 picks later on certain players. And honestly, I don't think that I adjust enough on DraftKings because I just say, Kyle Pitts going at pick 100 on DraftKings. Yeah, that's a smash all day. Last year when he was going, 70, 80, whatever it was on Underdog. In general, the biggest scoring differences it's PPR for both DraftKings and Drafters. So I think I've always kind of focused more on wide receivers on like early on. I do even more zero RB on DraftKings than on Underdog just because it is full PPR. I kind of think though that I might have it a little bit wrong in doing that, and maybe I'm adjusting too early for something that I haven't played that many slates on DraftKings. But given that I haven't had a ton of success, I kind of think there's also you get bonuses for like 100 yards rushing, 100 yards receiving, that kind of thing on DraftKings that you don't get on Underdog. So maybe it's just you really want to focus more on the best talent on DraftKings as opposed to, I focus a lot on correlation, trying to correlate my stuff on Underdog. I wonder if I am doing that too early on DraftKings to my detriment when you really just need like the players who are going to put up huge scores, because it does compound on itself with the 100-yard bonuses, all that kind of stuff. The PPR on DraftKings, you really do need volume there. Whereas on Underdog, you can get away with, a guy just having, 150-yard touchdown reception like that goes a lot further on Underdog than it does on DraftKings. So it's kind of something that I'm adjusting going forward. I think my approach to DraftKings and Drafters to some extent as well. But in general, I've always tried to just go for players who I think of as being better PPR plays on DraftKings and on Drafters, and honestly have not adjusted my stuff much outside of that for those sites.
So a couple things on that. First off, I am dollar-wise, I am 80% FFPC. I play more dollars. It's $125 per draft, so it adds up quick.
Yeah,
I tend to use Underdog more for volume. I did about 500-600 drafts there, and I maxed out the DK Millie last year. Couple things. One, I'm a little surprised because I think you're a DK player for
DFS.
For DFS. So that's a little surprising. Two, it's 20 rounds versus 18 during the main part of the season. So I do think that I think that is something that really makes a huge difference in how I draft. I'm almost always going to want a third quarterback, or I'm going to want two quarterbacks who are really good, right? And then the other thing is, so I do want to ask you, because you're a DK player for DFS, but for me, I've had a hard time because of FFPC and always being a full PPR guy. I've struggled with half PPR, and I'm making some changes this year, like this rookie class. There are a lot of big two-down backs in this rookie class that normally I wouldn't draft, but they are really good late picks. Estime, if I say that name right, Marshawn Lloyd, Estime. Estime time of arrival a little slower than you would want. And there's a few others. What's his name? Braden Allen. There's a bunch of big backs that are really good late picks right now on Underdog because they can get you that touchdown. So that I've struggled just the opposite. But go ahead with the DK part of it.
Yeah, so I love DK for DFS. just the user interface is not as good on DraftKings. I think they have improved every year a little bit. It's just been. I also think like sometimes I miss my pick, like for whatever reason, like the alerts on DraftKings are not as
They
consistent of like
suck.
letting you know. Yeah,
They
so it's just
suck.
I just I struggle there. I sometimes I'll do slow drafts on DraftKings just because it is so bad with like the alerts come like after your pick has already
You
happened
can't do a
in
live
fast
draft
draft.
unless you're literally sitting
Right, you have
in
to
front
stay
and
in the
doing.
draft room, which
I'll do
I'm
2 or
really not
3 at
doing.
one time. Yep.
Yeah, so it's just a struggle with the user interface, I think, on DraftKings, and also just things like not showing you your exposures. Like the first year I played on DraftKings, I actually downloaded every single draft and made my own sheet with my exposures. Last year I didn't even bother because I didn't play enough volume, but it's just everything's just a little bit not as good of a user experience on DraftKings for best ball. So it's just, and it's fun. I like the best ball mania, having the $3 million first prize is fun, having the regular season prizes is fun. People making leaderboards, different tools for underdog that I think are generally better than the tools for the third party tools than the tools are for DraftKings. So there's just, I don't know, I just find it more fun. I find it to be a more pleasing experience drafting on underdog, even though I think DraftKings has much softer competition, even though, like, as I said last year,
It wasn't as soft last year as it had been. I think that was a little overplayed last year. But my theory on that is, Neil, if you've got 3 or 4 super teams in every draft, have you really gained anything? Right?
what you've gained is that your competition is down to you're one of 4 teams that's really competitive
Right.
versus, so in terms of actually winning the championship, maybe not, but just in terms of like advancing, like the floor
Yeah.
theoretically should be higher just because you're competing with 3 others instead of 11 others.
Yeah. I need to put more thoughts into both of those other sites. I did not have a good year last year, but we could, we'll get to some of those questions. So, and that again, that was my next question. Every year I've done best ball, I've come out of the year with a couple key thoughts. What I think I need to do differently being the first one. What did you come out of last year? What were your biggest takeaways for you personally that you wanted to improve on for this year?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I do too much is really not drafting enough running backs, like just going fragile with running backs, where I'm just drafting like 4 running backs total, or 5, and they're not the best running backs.
Let me interject. Okay, yeah. See, to me, one of the biggest mistakes I see the field make in best ball is going fragile both in the number, but then not overweighting that with talent.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's this kind of like a cocktail where, like, I just did a draft on FFPC where I started with Brees Hall and I didn't draft another running back till the 10th round, but I ended up with 7 running backs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think that my first instinct when I started playing best ball was, okay, you need 3 wide receivers and 2 running backs plus a flex that can be wide receiver, running back, or flex. So it was just like natural, like, yeah, I want more wide receivers than running backs. And I still think that that's generally true, but I think that I have sort of historically made the mistake of overweighting the number of wide receivers you want versus running backs, in part because running backs just get hurt way more than other positions. So if you draft 4, there's a good chance there are going to be weeks where 3 of them are hurt, or or at least not playing much. So I've just more and more I've thought, even though you do need more wide receivers than running backs, first of all, you can like they do get hurt a lot more, which hurts if you only draft a few. And even if if you draft 4 in the first 6 rounds, like, that seems great. You've got from a talent perspective, that's probably enough, but like, they are big injury risk. But it also means you can just take more shots on late round backup running backs who taking the 0 RB approach. Oftentimes those later round running backs are going to come into a bigger role later in the season, or have opportunities to come into bigger roles. And running back is just, it's a position that is so much more, like, the opportunity is so much more important than the talent. Whereas wide receiver, if you're not a good wide receiver, there's never going to be an opportunity that's going to make you a really strong fantasy player, or it's a rare thing that's going to happen. So it's more likely that a late round backup running back is going to come into relevance, come into being like somebody you need in the fantasy playoffs versus a late round wide receiver. So I've just more and more, I'm like, rather than taking, an 8th wide receiver, why don't I take a 6th running back with one of those late round picks?
Yeah, and again, my whole theory is to weight them. In other words, you get one or the other.
Yep.
Let's say the normal build for me is 2-5. What's that? 7-8-3. 2-5-8-3 tends to be my most owned in an 18-round draft.
Yep.
But if I take a lot of one position early, I've gotten better at lowering that number, to try and balance out. And as I've gotten to be more of a hero or zero running back player than I had been previously, that becomes all the more important. Way too many people think they're doing zero running back, and then they draft 5 running backs with 4 of them being double digits. And that's, there's fragile, and then there's too fragile.
Yeah.
To be, and the other funny thing I always see on Twitter is, someone will always say, "Well, this could work," and I go, "Well, yeah, anything could work,
Right? Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I mean, but
Unless you're drafting 8 quarterbacks, then it's like, okay, that's probably not ever going to work.
Anything could work. And one year, someone's going to win $1 million with 4 quarterbacks, and and everyone's going to go around saying, "See, I told you could do it," but that doesn't mean it was the right way to do it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So for me, the biggest takeaway from last year, and it's something I've struggled with, it's the biggest hole in my game, is at the running back position. I am so concerned with talent that at times I miss opportunity. So I'm talking James Conner, I'm talking Rashad White, middle round guy, and I was, I missed out on too many of the running backs that hit later because I rightly thought they didn't have the talent, especially in Rashad White's case.
Yeah.
But we talk about how running back, the volume is more important than the skill. Yeah. And there's this weird little balance where they both matter, because if you're too inefficient, they'll bench you eventually.
Right.
But that's my biggest one, just to share mine.
I had that same issue. Those are 2 examples for me too that I didn't draft because I was like, well, the talent isn't really there. At some point, they're just going to have somebody else come in and beat them to it. Actually, Kyren Williams is probably the best example for me of, I was like, well, 18th round, I'd rather take a shot on, like, I know that Kyren Williams is slow. I know that he's, not the best running back out there. So really, what is the upside in a Kyren Williams? Even if he did become the guy, like he's never going to be a star running back. And of course, that was mega wrong because the opportunity was just so good for Kyren Williams.
And he turned out to be more talented than we gave him credit for. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't one thing; it was a combination of things.
Yeah.
I've got to ask you, because I really struggle to take a guy like that in the 2nd round. If I have one share, it's a lot right now. Do you feel the same way with him now?
I'd take him some. So this is a question that you're probably that I know you have coming down the line is approach in the first couple rounds. I don't stray too far from ADP in the first couple rounds, and that would be an example of just, I don't want to have 0 of a guy that I know we just saw last year what he can do. I don't want to end up with 0 of that guy, which maybe I'm being a little bit too risk averse by not fading a guy like that. But the opportunity was so good last year, and I think he did well enough with his opportunity that he's probably going to have still a pretty solid opportunity this year. So I definitely understand the hesitation, but I've drafted him some. I think I'm probably underweight to what the field is doing with Kyren, but I draft him occasionally just because I don't want to completely miss out on a guy that has already showed us that he can be a guy you need.
So I agree with that. And so I've gotten yelled at multiple times because everyone will say no risk it, no biscuit. But from my study of best ball over the last number of years, I've come to now early best ball, I'm willing to be more risk averse because I'm not doing volume, right?
Sure.
If I do 10 contests on FFPC and I do 50 on underdog, I'm less concerned with covering,
Right.
I'm not really worried about exposure. But when I am going to do 60 to 100, $125 drafts, and I'm going to do 400, 500, I've got a very firm, I don't want to be over 15% on someone in the first two rounds, and I don't want to be under 4%. They're in those rounds for a reason. And
Yeah.
I found picking winners and losers in those rounds beyond those parameters can get you in way more trouble than it can benefit you if you get it right.
Yeah, and that's I would say probably similar to me. I think, the upper hand of that, maybe I'd get up to 20% of a player in the first couple of rounds, but actually I say that and I'm like, I don't know that I actually have. So maybe our parameters are actually pretty similar there. Like that seems about fair. I'm not breaking too far from ADP, even when, this year I like Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase should be in the conversation for the 101 and he's going at 5. So there's a part of me that's like, maybe I should just really play into this, take a ton of Jamar Chase, but I don't do it because I'm like, well, Tyreek Hill again is a guy who showed us last year how good he was, and I have concerns. He's getting older, yada yada, but he's going at 103. I'm usually going to take him at 103 just because I don't, or often I am, just because I don't want to go without Tyreek Hill again this year and watch him do what he did last year once again. So yeah, I think I often tend to follow ADP in the first couple rounds more so than later on.
Yeah, agreed 100% based on what I said. I've got a couple other thoughts. We'll come back to this
Sure.
because I also wanted to ask you, the other most important thing in retrospection is to try and guess what the field is going to overcompensate on, right? We see it every year. So, what did you think the field was going to overcompensate on based on what happened last year? And so far, has that played out in your early best balls?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that happened last year that maybe isn't going to happen every year is we had so many quarterbacks get hurt. Like quarterbacks were getting hurt as if they were running backs last year. So I think a lot of people who got bit by it, maybe didn't have a quarterback for the playoff rounds, are going to start drafting 3-4 quarterbacks in an 18-round draft, and it's probably going to happen too much. The 3 to 4 quarterback builds, even just 3 quarterbacks. I think people are going to draft, Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy, which I think is a very solid quarterback room. And in the 18-round draft, I think they're still going to throw on a third quarterback because, well, what if both of these guys get hurt? So I think that the field is going to overreact a little bit to the number of quarterback injuries from last year. And I agree with you in a 20-round draft, I'm much more inclined to take 3 quarterbacks. But in an 18-round draft, depending on when you start drafting your quarterbacks, depending on which quarterbacks you get, I think it's going to hurt you more than it helps you to draft a third quarterback on a lot of teams. So I kind of think that that's a place that the field is going to overreact.
Yeah, and I think we've seen it play out so far, and I'll go into that in a second. And that was my biggest takeaway as well, is that but what we also saw at quarterback was we came off a couple of years where the top guys really separated.
Yeah.
And last year they didn't separate as much. So what we've seen is, other than Josh Allen, and even he's down a few picks. And even if you're down 4 or 5 picks from last year in the second round, that's the equivalent of almost a round and a half in the third, fourth round.
Sure.
So we've seen the top tier guys drop back around, but we've seen the second tier and third tier move up.
Yeah.
Right now, during, to your point, it's not just how many you draft, but when you're forced to take them.
Yeah.
Right. So in an 18-round draft, if you're forced to take 3 early, that is going to spread the rest of your lineup very thin.
Yep.
So I would much rather take one of the top guys who've dropped a round or two, again, mostly because it's a reaction to what happened last year more than the likelihood of them paying off or not paying off their ADP, and then take another good one at the end of the single digit rounds, or like right now, I'm really big on taking Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels.
Same.
Because I think they've got really good rushing upside. And, it would be very surprising if they're both not starting. And Caleb Williams, if you watch his tape, that guy loves to take the ball near the goal line and rush it in. He, if it's a read option and he can run it in, he's going to. So that's my thought on the quarterback position and what we've seen so far. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that is 100% true. Yeah, we have seen just everybody kind of mush together. Outside of, as you said, Josh Allen still takes pretty early, but I often will now take my targets are kind of Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, like that kind of range. I really like taking those guys because I do think that they are better. Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, probably the best examples. I do like them significantly better than Patrick Mahomes or what's his name? The Texans quarterback, CJ Stroud. Like I would rather take shots on a Lamar Jackson than those guys around later. So yeah, I think that I'm with you. I'm willing to take those quarterbacks, the top tier quarterbacks who have fallen around. I'm in on those guys, not as much into the guys around later. But then also, as you said, like you do need to pay up for even like Brock Purdy, what was the last round pick last year. You got to take him now around like mid 90s pick. It's you really can't wait on quarterback all that much unless you're going to just take 3 dart throws toward the end of the draft. And at this point, it's like guys that we don't even know if they're going to be starting are the guys you're getting in the late rounds. Whereas last year you could get guys who are going to be the starting quarterback. You could get them really late. You can't really get that anymore these days. If you're drafting a quarterback late, it's players that you don't know are actually going to be starting quarterbacks.
And that's one of the keys to best ball that I think that's kind of an advanced thought in best ball that even a lot of the smart people don't talk about too often, right? You don't see people tweeting on Twitter about that. I have one CJ Stroud share and one Nico Collins share, and they're on the same team.
Yeah.
I think CJ Stroud's ADP is the worst one. There are guys who I think could outscore him much later. Yeah, we'll get, I like that question, JM. I'll put that up in a minute. So I feel like, no rushing floor with Stroud. And one of the really, really sneaky things from a DFS perspective that translates with CJ Stroud is we saw last year on weeks where they weren't behind, they were much more happy to run the ball when they had a lead. And now they're going to be adding more talent. They're going to be better team overall, most likely. I think people are underestimating how much they're going to pull back. And we've seen them. I'll throw out a guy that I like late. I haven't drafted a ton of them yet. It just hasn't happened. But Kyler Murray, to me right now, is one of the best.
Great ADP. Yep.
Best values on the board. When he came back, he was one of the top scorers. And I trust my knowledge of best ball that when we get closer to the season, you're not going to be able to get Kyler Murray because enough smart people are going to, if I figured it out, there's going to be enough smart people figuring it out that his ADP will change. We do have a question. I don't mind taking little breaks. And it's one that I've been drafting a good bit of this guy. So I am looking for your take as well on Stephon Diggs.
Yeah. So I don't know what my exposure is right now. I think that he's like his ADP is about right now. Like I agree with the wide range of outcomes. Like he could be a first round talent who is going in sometimes as late as the early 3rd round. So he might be going far too late from that perspective. But as you said, he wasn't good for the second half of last year. So I do have some concerns, but generally I would say my thinking is he is a number 1 receiver. Like I think he's got the talent to be a number 1 receiver. I think it was just he was disgruntled, didn't have the role he wanted last year. I'm not aware of him being hurt, but I think he's talented enough.
He said he wasn't.
Yeah,
they asked him, and he said he wasn't.
He's talented enough that I expect him to come back to be a wide receiver 1 again. Yes, there are concerns there, but really, any player that's not going in the first round, there's probably warts on them. Yeah, he's got the warts. We got concerns with the last year kind of falling off a cliff. I think he actually did the year prior to some extent. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but that's my recollection from the previous year. I'm still willing to take him where he's going in drafts.
Yeah, I'm going to bring something up because I think I'm not a big one for comments in a vacuum, right? And
Sure.
I'm not saying you had comments in a vacuum, but I want to share my screen and show you where he's going around. So when I look at the people that are going around him, I mean, Tank Dell coming off an injury, Chris Olave, Debo. I mean, we've seen him be up and down. Barkley, we don't even know where he's going to be. Rashee Rice. I mean, if Kelsey comes back and plays better and they add another weapon, who knows? And Ayuk again. The San Francisco guys going this early doesn't make a lot of sense. You're really going to need an injury to one of them for the other to pay off. We've seen that. My favorite guy in this range is Davante Adams. So I'm willing to take Diggs simply because everyone in that area has questions to me.
Yeah, big time.
And so I'm willing to take, I'm happy to be overweight on him. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good context. That it is just that round, like that area of the draft board is just so ugly. Drafted around ADP there. I don't feel all that confident. I take Ayuk and I'm like, he'll probably be good again. He's still pretty young, probably an emerging talent. So I kind of like Ayuk there. Davante Adams, but even Davante Adams, like he's getting a little bit older. We don't know who the quarterback is going to be for Davante Adams, so there's still concerns with Davante Adams also.
But it's hard to imagine the quarterback situation being worse.
True, yeah, it was right? It was not great last year,
right?
That is a fair point. Yeah, that's also good context of like, yeah, the quarterback play is probably not going to be great, but as you said, like he had big spike weeks last year with bad quarterback play, so we know Davante Adams certainly capable of that. But yeah, everybody in that range is Rashee Rice. Like, are the Chiefs going to add a wide receiver? Like, is Rashee Rice really that special of a talent where he's going to hold on and be the clear number one receiver? I'm not sure. There are big concerns with everybody in that range. Sometimes they even will take a player.
His ADOT is not great. I think he can win down the field. But like you said, I think there's a lot of questions there. I'm glad we did that. And, and I like to bring the context in because I feel that's my edge.
Yeah.
Between best ball and DFS. Because the projections can't get all this stuff. Anyone who has ever, from Derek Carty to Blender to everyone, projections take 4 or 5 weeks to settle because we need the certainty on the roles and things of that nature. So if you can kind of do an internal math with best ball and kind of get these angles, if you can get it right, you can find an edge.
For sure.
All right. One of the big things I focused on more this season is coming up with and you mentioned this already, and I love that you kind of hit on things before I even get there, but I'm kind of looking in a different way as best ball being so unique as a dual strategy. What's it going to take for this team? As I'm drafting a team, having one thought of what am I putting into this team to help it advance? And what am I doing to help it get through the gauntlet of week 15, 16, 17? Can you talk about your thoughts on that and maybe some ways that you do that?
Yeah, so I think that I just try to do it with you're thinking about your team as a portfolio. So you want to have within each position group, you want to have players that are kind of provide the steady base of just like, yeah, this guy's going to have volume throughout the year. He's going to, provide me kind of a floor starting in week 1. He's going to be putting up probably 10 to 12 fantasy points on his bad weeks. I'm trying to think of good examples of like James Cook is probably a guy who, the floor is pretty strong with a guy like James Cook provides a strong base. But then you also want to have players within each position group who are going to have massive spike week potential, who are going to, maybe he's going to put up a 25. And I'm trying to think of later on, like obviously like Jahmyr Gibbs is a great example of a guy who, has that. I don't think he has the strongest floor, but the ceiling is clearly there. with Jahmyr Gibbs. Thinking about later round guys would be like a backup running back. Obviously, Kyron was the perfect example last year, although he kind of
let me interrupt for a second, because I think you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
And for a first round pick, he has the worst floor of any running back that on a week to week basis that I can remember. Right.
Yeah. Assuming things stay the same as last year.
Yeah. But he was a fourth or fifth round pick last year. Right. You don't need, at the whole premise of the draft is the early guys give you floor and ceiling.
Yeah.
And as you move down, you're giving up one or the other. Right. That's why they slot in.
Yeah.
But his ceiling, and let's throw Devin Achane into this as well, because I think they're very similar. The floors, they both have another running back there who's more of the touchdown guy. So my question is, you've drafted Achane or Jahmyr Gibbs. How does that affect the way you draft the rest of the draft?
Yeah, so then, and I think I talked about this maybe with Sacrilegious, or maybe I heard this on another pod, but gave the example of like a good pairing with Jahmyr Gibbs if they were not on the same team. And honestly, I think even if they're on the same team, a guy like David Montgomery, who just has that high floor, like that makes him a good pairing. It's like Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have those spike weeks where he puts up 30 fantasy points just because his touches just turned into, multiple touchdowns or 100 yards. He's just able to bust off a few long runs. Whereas David Montgomery is just going to get, 10 to 12 fantasy points on volume alone. So I think you draft one of those guys early on, a Devin Achane or a Jahmyr Gibbs. I think you then later on want to take some of those, starting running backs who are maybe not the sexiest players, like a Chuba Hubbard, another example, Chuba Hubbard, where it's like, yeah, he's not going to be a guy who's going to put up 30 fantasy points very often, I don't think, but he's probably going to be the starting running back. He's probably going to have a pretty high floor. So I think, you take one of those high ceiling guys early, you want to mix in some higher floor running backs that are going to give you the floor on the weeks when Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't do anything, when the touches don't turn into anything because he doesn't get enough touches. And I will say, I think part of the reason Jahmyr Gibbs and Devin Achane, I'll draft him sometimes in the second round or late first, I guess, for Jahmyr Gibbs, is just the hope that the role is going to expand this year, where it's just like,
right.
Well, they didn't get a ton of looks last year, so the floor was really low. But if they do increase the number of looks that they get, number of touches this year, then I think the floor will come up, or at least we're hopeful that the floor might come up this year also.
For me, one of the things that I've already been going in this direction, but all the more, I kind of look at the first half of my draft as these are the guys, for the most part, who have to help me advance, right?
Yep.
However, I mix and match them together. The second half of the draft, I'm much more, if you look at almost every one of my drafts, you'll see 5-6 rookies out of the last 10 picks. Especially now where you don't have any certainty, so they're kind of all sitting in kind of this late range. And then you add the fact that this is a good wide receiver draft, supposedly. So throwing out 3 or 4 of those guys late. So what I'm looking for is to try and get to the playoffs with the first half of my team and kind of supercharge it with the second half. And that's a rough thing, but that's one thought that I've had, and I'm curious as to your take on that.
Yeah, people have said for years you can't win your league in the first round, but you can lose your league in the first round. I think that's kind of the same kind of concept. As I'm looking for safety in those first couple rounds, looking for players that I feel the best that they are going to have a significant role. I don't want to take a ton of chances, so I feel a lot better about taking a guy like Christian McCaffrey or Jamar Chase, the early round guys, than the late round guys when you really do start to have question on, like Jahmyr Gibbs. Like I don't love I don't love that click, even though I clearly can see the upside case. I do have, concerns that maybe the volume doesn't come up as much as we expect it to. We know Dan Campbell loves David Montgomery, so there's no guarantee there. I definitely I think that it makes sense to draft for floor early on. I think that, and you can, draft for floor, honestly, floor and ceiling. As you said, the earlier ones, you can get kind of both in most of your picks early on. So yeah, I think it makes sense to draft for a lot of floor early on, and then later on you could also kind of get an
Not
idea.
floor, not I didn't want to give that impression. I'm not looking for floor necessarily. I still want a high combination. You still need to
Sure.
score a lot of
Yeah,
points,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
right? But I guess what I'm more saying is I'm willing to take more chances late than
Sure.
I have. With rookies, I'm much less likely to draft that guy who might get me. In the old days in best ball, when you did these MFL 10s and you were trying to win your league, a guy like John Brown who might give you 3 games,
Yeah.
with a long touchdown, that was kind of considered the optimal strategy for the late wide receiver. That guy who could get you that long touchdown. I'm more saying that I've moved away from that towards a rookie, whether a running back, wide receiver, or a tight end, who might get an opportunity and have the skills to be a floor ceiling guy down the stretch.
And we saw several examples of that last year, obviously, with Kyron Williams, Tank Dell, Puka Nakua. Sam Laporta was early on a late round pick. So we saw several examples of players who became stars you could get really late. And yeah, if you draft a veteran late, you can feel pretty confident that they're not going to become a star. Most of the guys that are available in the 17th, 18th round, if they've been in the league for a couple of years, you can feel pretty confident that they are not going to turn into a star. Whereas, yeah, I'm the same way. I think that's part of the evolution of my game has been, even though I don't watch college football, I don't know much about these rookies, just knowing a little bit about them, I feel more comfortable in just saying, you know what, maybe a Malik Washington, I don't know that much about him, but he's probably more likely to become a star than some, veteran 30-year-old receiver who's the wide receiver 3 on his team. So yeah, I think that makes sense to take some risks on players that are clearly not established. Later on, you can shoot for upside more than shooting for just players that, yeah, I think he's going to be the wide receiver 3. He'll probably have a couple 12-point games. Like
Right.
You need more than that.
Because you're looking in this kind of contest, you're looking, again, FFPC is a little bit different because you can advance with 17% week 15 and 25% of teams make it to the finals. I'm less likely to feel the need to supercharge that team. But, where I'm going to go up against 500 or 1,000 teams in the final, and I need one of 18 to get to the final, that's how I'm willing to be more risky, to try and get that one team that can do it. Now, I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that that's the way that I'm kind of taking the puzzle to the next level.
No, I think it makes sense.
All right. So that kind of segued into the next question, that this time of year, there are discounts on 2 types of players where we have uncertainty: free agents and rookies. How do you prepare? I mean, for me, you already kind of talked about you're not a college guy, neither am I, but I've been really good at watching tape, especially on running backs. So like last year, I liked Tank Dell. I liked Nakua. Tajay Spears, I was famously in on. To me, people flash when I watch their tape, and I say, "Oh, flash! That flash can translate to the next level." Do you have anything like that, or is there anything you look to? And are you? Because before I started watching tape, I just kind of missed out on the rookies, so I was curious as to your thoughts on it. And then we're going to get to another Jewish McCaffrey question.
So I don't watch a ton of tape. I have listened to several pods that other people have done on the rookies, so I can get a feel for, the types of rookies that we're getting this year. So to some extent, I'm doing that. I also I do try to get ahead of so last year, I think of last year, there was a better example than one that I can think of this year. Last year, we had we knew that Dalvin Cook was not coming back to the Vikings. It was pretty clear if you read the tea leaves that Dalvin Cook wasn't coming back to the Vikings. Yet still somehow when that news came out, we saw Alexander Madison's ADP rise 50 spots. Alexander Madison, and I regret
he went from barely worth it to not worth it at all.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's 100% correct.
But see,
but still, you would have
but that's my hole again, right? because I faded Madison, I faded Connor, I faded White. I was right on only one of
Yeah.
three. So
Right. But my point is sometimes you kind of know what's coming. And if you can get ahead of ADP sometimes on these situations because people overreact to news. And a lot of the time it's news that you already know. Like you already know Gabe Davis is going to leave the Bills. Now maybe the field has gotten better because now we already see Khalil Shakir is going honestly probably higher than he should be going, I would guess, because I think the Bills probably bring in a wide receiver too. Shout out Matthew Berry's column. Kind of the rumor suggested that maybe they're going to bring in another wide receiver ahead of Khalil Shakir. But I think that there are a lot of those kind of scenarios.
Shakir's role really is more of a slot guy.
Yeah.
Now, can he? I think they really want someone. They want a deep threat in that spot, and that's not Shakir. So, could it happen? It could, but I agree with you that the ADP is assuming it is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think just I do try to stay a little bit like Kenneth Gainwell. I think that there is a non-zero chance that he comes into the year as the RB1 for the Eagles. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think he's probably back in the RB2 role, but just trying to get ahead of the news a little bit, I think is generally a good approach. Just
I'm a
understanding
little burnt because I assumed that last year and week one he was, and then he got hurt.
Yep.
And then there's nothing worse. Same thing with Montgomery. I was right on Montgomery, and he was crushing. And then he got hurt, and when he came back, the role it had morphed.
Yep. No, for sure.
And back to what you were saying. Just throwing this out there for your thoughts. What about taking Gibbs with Mostert and Achane with Montgomery? Because I don't like stacking two running backs from the same team when they go that early. I think you're giving up every week. You're guessing which one you're going to get that week. Some weeks it'll be neither. I think that weakens you too much. But I think mixing one of those floor guys with one of the upside guys might be interesting.
I like that. That is definitely in good pairings there. I would say that they work well together. We were talking, I brought up the Gibbs Montgomery pairing. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Just, alternating because you kind of have the same kind of setup for both those teams. Of course, Mostert is also a guy who can put up a big spike week.
Absolutely.
I like that. I like that.
That's it. Yeah. And Montgomery did too. Montgomery put up a couple big weeks too.
That's true.
I just think that they've gotten to the point where the role that Montgomery had when he spiked, I don't see we'll see that role again, short of an injury. But where Mostert, Achane, I think it's still up in the air.
Yeah. Well, Mostert now, what is it going to be, 32 coming in this year? I think that we're kind of assuming that Achane is going to take on a bigger role, but also the injury risk is just higher than ever for Mostert, who has also had injury concerns throughout his career.
I would not be shocked at all if they pick one of these rookies too.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, we talk about the 2 down backs in this draft. All right, we got another question from the esteemed Mr. McCaffrey. If memory serves, you guys both played a decent amount of weekly winners last year. Planning to play it again this year? Any strategy adjustment for that contest? Neil, I'm going to let you take that one first.
Yeah, so I love weekly winners. I think that people generally play it wrong. I think people just draft it as though it is best ball, and I think that is the wrong way to approach it. I liked my approach last year, but I don't think so. I think my approach was good in that I'm trying to focus on 2 to 3 weeks. Like I'm trying to draft a team that is going to look really good in 2 to 3 specific weeks. So I'm drafting for game stacks in those weeks and also drafting for softer matchups in general, just trying to find players who are going to be in great matchups for the specific weeks that I am targeting. Because I think, first of all, like very few people get paid at all in weekly winners. But also it's still very top heavy. Like to win first place, you really have to have a spike week. So I think just focusing on a few weeks, not just trying to draft, regular best ball, like really trying to strategize for specific weeks is the approach that I took last year that I think was pretty good. I lost money on weekly winners in the regular season. I lost money regular season weekly winners, but I still think that is the correct approach most likely. But also another thing that I like about the approach is it really does bring down your combinatorial ownership, which I think is, a huge advantage in weekly winners is having different players. So an example of something that I tried to do actually didn't work out is I took Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 101 and then drafted, and I was hoping to then draft Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews at the 2-3 turn, which is about, they were going like late second. They were both going, mid third round, or early second, late third round, or mid third. Sorry, early to mid third round. They were both going around there. So it's going to be a unique combo to have a late first round player with an early and mid third round player. Like that combo, just nobody else, not many people are going to have that combo. Even in a contest with hundreds of thousands of people, I was going to have a really low combinatorial ownership team. I think that just focusing on certain weeks also kind of forces you into low combinatorial ownership builds. But even beyond that, I think that it's a good idea to approach it looking for, especially in the early rounds. Like a lot of people are going to have players that are unique combos from the later rounds, but I think even focusing on mixing things up early on in weekly winners can give you a big advantage, because if you get the players that's all spike on the right weeks, and not many people have those combos from like the first 5 rounds, you can find yourself with a huge advantage.
Yeah, I did not do that. What I did was I would pick a super spike week player. Let's say a lot of Devontae Adams,
Sure.
because he had been one of the few guys who just really, what I was really trying to do was pick a guy and build the team around that one guy, right? Because only a few guys are going to get 40 points in a year. And certain guys have shown the ability to do it, and certain people haven't. So Justin Fields was another one that I, built some teams around that didn't come through.
Sure.
And then, like I got the reputation of being a 1 QB guy. It wasn't that I was a 1 QB guy as much as I was, well, if I'm building this team around Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, why would I take a second quarterback, right? The thought was I would rather give myself more chances for it if I got a 50-point week from Chase and a 40-point week from Burrow. Okay, now how am I, like Blender? Okay, now how am I going to differentiate myself? And one of it was by not having an extra quarterback, and by but then I would also, like, I would either go heavy running back early or heavy wide receiver early. And I was picking a lot of stud tight ends because they tend to put up spike weeks that the rest of the tight ends can't. So I was trying to mix and match that kind of combination together, hoping to get what I ended up not getting. So like you, I didn't win money. To me, whether, because his question was, will I play it again? It depends on the contest. It depends on the kind of information that comes out. And it depends the most on whether people adjust. Because like you said, most people were drafting it like a regular best ball. If that continues, I will continue to have interest. If there becomes a predominant strategy, I'll feel that enough of the edge is gone that I'd rather put my money somewhere else. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is well said. So my intention is definitely to play again. I loved it. I think that the field played way different than I do, which is where you can find bigger edge. The more the field plays different than you play, the more edge you can find, unless you're completely wrong, obviously. But I agree with Todd that if the field adjusts, if we start seeing everybody taking the same approach that I take, then I'll lose some of my interest. I'll probably play a little bit less. I did really enjoy it though. I thought it was really fun last year. I know Jewish McCaffrey also loved the Eliminator contest. I also love the Eliminator. Like I plan on playing all of them once again. I really enjoy cracking a new game. So it was like, DFS at this point, I'm like, everybody kind of knows how to play DFS. The vast majority of the field is pretty good at it. These new games is really what I'm into. So I'm definitely into weekly winners until it feels like it is solved.
Yeah. And then I that's how I felt last year. And I'm hoping to feel the same way again.
Yeah.
I just the other thing that I really loved about weekly winners is I've always had all these rules for best ball. 15% ownership, this, that, the other
Sure,
thing.
sure.
I felt like with weekly winners, it was like pants off. Draft however
Yeah,
draft, however the hell you want.
right.
Because but as long as you have the goal of that one team having 1 week where they go nuts,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I thought that was real interesting. I got one or two more questions. You didn't talk much about rookies, but are there any that kind of you find yourself drawn to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely with you on Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and even Drake May. I've been drafting a good amount of.
I'm starting to.
Yeah,
He
I've been.
runs the ball too.
Yep. So those three quarterbacks I've definitely been in on. Sadly, I was very much in, and I blame Spags for this. I was very much on Audric Estime, just based on the what I'd heard about him, and then of course he did much worse at the combine than anybody expected. So now I'm like, okay, maybe I need to dial back the
Not
Audric
not,
Estime.
not me. So all
You're
right,
still going there.
I'm
Okay.
going to give you hope.
Well, then I'm crediting Spags then. If Estime is going to be what
I'm
still
going to
credit
give you hope. So when I watched his tape, the first, so I made a rule that I have to watch until I get to like the 60th prospect or 80th prospect, I have to watch 4 games.
Sure.
Even if it's just the highlights, I gotta get, because you can gain an opinion early and then see it change. So my first game with Estime, I was like, oh, this guy is not for me, right? He is not, because like I said, I'm an athlete guy, right?
Yeah.
But then I started noticing where he doesn't have speed, he's quick in tight places for a big guy, which means he can get you the 4 and 5 and 6 yards. He's not going to be the guy who breaks off a long play, but that guy who can move in a tight space at the line of scrimmage and find a hole and accelerate through the hole well, which he does, that's a guy who can get touchdowns. So I think that Estime, his bad tape is, so there were 3 guys that I just wasn't on at running back. Braylon Allen, I just don't get his ADP. He didn't do much for me. I like Estime more than Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen just is much more of a running back to me. The other one I didn't like was Bucky Irving. I thought to myself, for a guy whose whole game is third down back, scat back, I thought he was too slow. I didn't see the kind of burst that I would expect from that prototype of a player. So those 2 guys both didn't do well at the combine. Even with the discount, I don't know if I'm interested in Bucky Irving, because he's not the kind of guy who's going to do much for you in half PPR, right?
Sure.
Even if he gets on the field and he catches 3 for 20 and he doesn't sniff the end zone, I mean, that's not going to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the guy that I really liked out of the 2 down pounders was Marshawn Lloyd.
I've been drafting a lot of. He was also a guy that you could get at like pick 190 early on, and now he's come up quite a bit.
I had 50% of him in the little board.
Yeah.
And the other guy I had a ton of that's moved up is Jaden Wright. He was in the 20th round. I liked his tape. And then the one who's still late that I really liked was Ray Davis of Kentucky. I always say
he started to come up though.
What's that?
He's started to come up now too.
Starting to come up. Because you're starting to hear enough smart people talk about him.
Yeah, exactly. And which is my entire approach is listening to smart people tell me, which I believe you got me on Javon Baker. Is that his name?
Yes.
Late round. I think you tweeted about him and I was like, all right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I started drafting him a little bit.
So my 2 big sayings is I don't think there's a Tajay Spears in this draft, but if there is, it's Ray Davis.
Okay.
Right. And I say there's no Tank Dell in this draft, but if there is, it's Jacob Cowing. Jacob Cowing is a guy who is super proficient in college, putting up stats. And you watch him get in and out of breaks. Watch Tank Dell in college and then watch Jacob Cowing. And you might like Jacob Cowing coming in and out of breaks more than Tank Dell.
Interesting.
So so there's a few freebies for everyone, and I've already tweeted it out. All right, let's get to the last question. I talked about this a little more, so I'm actually going to just throw you something a little different. But just real quickly, I kind of touched on it. But how do you handle 20 versus 18?
Yeah, I think you can take more risks in general. Like you can start drafting those rookie players a little bit earlier in 20 rounds, the riskier guys, because you can have more shots on some of those guys who are probably not going to help you with advance rate as much. You can take more shots on the guys who are likelier to spike later on, who you can hope are going to take on a big role, have more of an upside to be an every week kind of player. So I think taking more rookies generally is going to be my approach to a 20 round versus 18.
Yep. I'm trying to get something to load, and it doesn't want to right now on Underdog. So what we're going to do, we're going to give it a second. Vaporware, thank you for joining me, cute doggo. What I want to start doing is I get all these smart people on my show, and then I talk probably as much as they do, if not more, which is just my style. But I want to learn from smart people. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to pull up, if it will. It doesn't seem to want to. I'm going to try it on my other browser. I want Neil to look at my last couple drafts and give me his honest thoughts. One of the key things to do is to learn from smart people. And too often we are so sensitive to criticism. So let's see if I can get, for some reason, of course, Underdog doesn't want to load my draft board, Neil.
Well, that's not, you could send it to me, but then you won't be able to show it on the screen. So I don't know.
Yeah, I can show. What's weird is it's showing the draft. Let me try a different draft. Maybe that'll do it. Nope. I just keep saying fetching your draft. All right, so we're not going to be able to see the whole board, but what I will be able to show you is my team. So let me do that. I apologize, guys. Dang right, Milton. Dang right.
Somehow I'm not seeing these questions. I have YouTube chat pulled up and haven't seen anything in a while. It's interesting.
Interesting. I'm in StreamYard. It's showing up in StreamYard. I don't know if you see it.
Oh, yeah. I see it in StreamYard. Okay.
Share screen. All right. So this is just the last draft that I did. And you can see I got Brock Purdy at 90, right at ADP. Jaden Daniels a little before ADP. And Kirk Cousins, who's another one of these guys, to your point, Neil, about how, we know he's going to sign somewhere.
Yeah.
I think he's a great value. So I got, it was a Christian McCaffrey team. And you'll notice that I went with 5 running backs and I went with more touchdown guys to go with him. Montgomery, Javonte, Roshan, and Estime. And then do you see my wide receivers?
Yep.
So I got Devontae and Rashi at 24, 25, Addison at 48, McLaurin, who's a guy I'm pretty high on. My first Quentin Johnson share, Hyatt, Bateman, Brendan Rice, Jawan Jennings, and then Kittle, Musgrave, and Dulcich at tight end. So I've got the 3-man stack, McCaffrey, Kittle, and Purdy. Jaden Daniels, if he ends up in LA and in Las Vegas, maybe. There's a couple. He could end up in Washington with McLaurin. So that's the team. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I like the approach of so I oftentimes I'll go in and I will draft a team like making assumptions about where the quarterback is going to be. So like Jaden Daniels, I've often drafted, and I'll throw him with like Pop Douglas, like assume that he's going to the Patriots. I've even thrown some Kendrick Bourne on there because Kendrick Bourne talked about how much he would love to play with Jaden Daniels. But I also have done some teams where I just take all three of the rookie running backs and then take the best wide receivers, like take a DJ Moore and a Terry McLaurin and a Pop Douglas, or whatever, and kind of play it out for a lot of different scenarios. Overall, so I lost the team now. So you have.
Well, let me go back to that team. I'm sorry.
So you had, I know you had Kirk Cousins with Jordan Addison, which of course now we don't know if Kirk Cousins is actually going to come back to the Vikings. There is some risk there that he's going.
And I didn't get any Falcons with him.
Yeah,
but so again, I felt that pick 144 as a third quarterback, I'm less worried about stacking and more just hoping to catch lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, that's true. I think your quarterback room, very, very strong. You've got the three quarterbacks. You've got major upside in Jaden Daniels. Brock Purdy, I think is going around the right pick. Kirk Cousins feels like a pretty solid pick for where he's going relative to other quarterbacks. So quarterbacks look good. Running backs, obviously you took Christian McCaffrey 101. You're making the bet that McCaffrey is going to stay healthy. He's going to be the guy, and he's going to be, probably scoring points for you just about every single week. So you don't really need to do that much more at running back. But you took kind of guys who are going to help you advance, I would say, in David Montgomery and Javonte Williams. Roshan might be one of those guys this year, but I think that he is at the very least, he's one of those guys who has upside for spike weeks in the playoffs. And then Estime, obviously, you're making the bet that he is a guy who can give you playoff spikes also. So I think this is, a reasonable 5 running back room. I think that typically I would maybe want to add one more on there, but I think that this is a fine 5 running back room.
Well, the thought was, and I'm okay if you disagree. The thought was, if this team advances, most McCaffrey teams are going to have. I feel like I gave a fairly unique. So basically, even in the playoffs, I'm only looking for 15 points from my second running back. Sure. I built the team to win elsewhere.
Yeah.
And to count on McCaffrey having 3 big weeks. So if you don't like that, I'm cool with that.
No, I think that it works. I think that you have a good mix of like floor and ceiling and potential like late spike weeks with your running back. So, I think that often it's one of those where I think probably more often I would add a 6th running back on there, but probably not always. I think that you have strong enough 5 running backs there that it works.
And what happened was when I got to the last pick, I took Juwan Jennings because there was no running back left that I thought was worthy.
Yeah.
If there was, I probably would have done what you said.
Exactly. And that's often what breaks the tie for me. You also took Greg Dulcich here, who is not a player that I've taken a lot of, but I feel like that could be a miss for me that I haven't been taking Greg Dulcich. What do you see there? He's going to come back and be a full-time TE1 this year?
Well, I think he's talented enough and he's going late enough that it won't matter. If he's the pass catching tight end and he has 3-4 big weeks, that's enough for me. If you look at my exposure, and you should be able to see it.
Yeah.
I've got him in 33% of teams.
Yeah.
I've got 24% Davis Allen, and I've got 18% Musgrave. Pretty high on Kelsey going so late.
Yep, he's going on a pretty nice.
Yeah, and I've been adding Kyle Pitts a lot more. I like Jatavian Sanders as a rookie. So that's my tight end room.
And George Kittle is also the kind of tight end. He's kind of unique in that he has such high spike week potential, but George Kittle has just a wide range of outcomes in general. He has some real floor games. So I think the third tight end can be helpful there, even though you did spend some draft capital on the tight end position. Yeah, I think it looks like a strong team, good correlations.
All right, let's go look at another one. This team is a 2 quarterback team, but like I said, I used a lot of draft capital on that too. Yep. Breece Hall, Montgomery, Eckler, Ray Davis, Elijah Mitchell, and Justice Hill. One of the things that I am a fan of is to take the backup with the guy who's correlated very closely to where you're drafted. So you kind of get a double win. So I like Elijah Mitchell on teams where I get that second to fifth or sixth pick, because if McCaffrey gets hurt, now you're kind of double tapping on your win, that you took someone other than McCaffrey early. So this team has. I don't have a ton of Eckler. We've talked about Ray Davis, and I think Justice Hill's kind of sneaky.
Yeah.
You can see my wide receiver room. I didn't have a stack for Lamar, and I kind of regret that. So I took Aguilar late.
Seems reasonable.
I am a big Dontavian Wicks guy.
Me too.
I think that Waddle is really interesting. Again, to that whole thought of, all right, well, Brees is going pretty close to Tyreek. If Tyreek gets hurt and I have Waddle, again, now I've supercharged this team.
You've got the two Jacksonville pass catchers, no Trevor Lawrence, but still some nice correlation with those two.
If I could, this was a draft where I got sniped on Lawrence around, I think by like a round and a half early.
Okay.
So yeah. This was meant to be a Trevor Lawrence team.
Yeah. And then you fell back on Tua, which obviously worked out.
Correct.
Also.
And then you could see I have 3 tight ends, which is what I tend to do unless I have one of the really big ones.
Yeah. I drafted a lot of 2 tight end teams, but I wonder if I should be doing more 3 tight end in these 20 rounds. I also often draft tight ends pretty early, but I mean, you have strong tight ends. Again, Evan Ingram was like one of the leading receivers of all tight ends last year, maybe even the leading receiver.
He had 113 catches, which insane. Again is not, an underdog thing, but his ADP, like if you look right now at his ADP, he's going,
82.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's the 8th tight end off the board behind a rookie.
Right.
And, I like Njoku, but, he did most of his damage with Flacco.
Yeah. Now Flacco's going to be gone.
Yeah. I mean, and where did I get him? Let's go back. I got him at pick 89. So I got 7 picks of value as well.
Plus, you're already adding him on too. You already had Christian Kirk on this team. So, yeah, he made a ton of sense for you. Dalton Schultz, man, 137. That's a really strong spot to take Dalton Schultz. It's like I probably typically would not add Noah Fant on there, but I have no issue with adding Noah Fant. It kind of depends on who's available in your room. If you don't love who else is available at pick 209, like I think he's totally reasonable 3rd tight end to throw onto the team.
Yeah, I wish we could look. I might have made an error there. But I already had 6 running backs and I had 9 wide receivers.
Do you have thoughts on where Tyler Lockett's going to end up?
Well, I mean, right now it's Seattle, right?
I thought that he's likely to be gone from Seattle this year. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I don't know that.
Okay.
That's a good one. But I think Tyler Lockett is still talented enough wherever he goes at his ADP to be worth it. You want to do one more before we get out of here?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So here's and I'm just going, my last couple drafts.
Yeah. 2 at 135 is nuts.
I didn't even need him.
Yeah.
But that was I can't believe that he's still here. So 3683. So you got to love this quarterback room with that value.
Yeah. The running backs is risky. You have 3 rookie running backs who could very well I don't feel as good about the rookie running backs as I do the receivers this year. So taking 3, but I'd say you have a pretty solid core in Henry, Aaron Jones, Najee Harris. I think there's going to be volume among those 3. So I think taking some shots on these rookie running backs who really wide range of outcomes. I think that it's fine in this room.
Yeah. I could see why that you would say that this running back room is a little light. I
Yeah.
mean, looking at it myself, this running back room is a little light. I don't have the ability to look at the whole draft as to why it happened.
Yeah.
But it is a little light. But I do like Cody Schrader. He didn't test well. But I think he's got the skills to be a good third down back in the league. All right. So AJ Brown, DJ Moore, Malik Neighbors, I love. I don't have a lot of Cup, but I did take him here. Hollywood, and then, two rookies and a guy who was an early pick who didn't play much last year.
Right.
And you gotta love the tight ends here. So I think that I think this is a pretty strong team, but not for stacking.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Hollywood Brown with Kyler Murray. You do have DJ Moore with Caleb Williams potentially, and then you don't have anybody with Tua. Is that correct? No Miami guys, unless one of the rookies ends up there.
There's no point. Yeah, the rookies. That's correct.
Which could happen.
I mean, this could have been and should have been a Hurts team. It just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And again, look at Goddard. Goddard wasn't a, oh wow, I need Goddard because I have AJ Brown. I got him at pick 130.
Yeah, it's just a good value on Goddard. Reasonable spot for Isaiah Likely, decent tight end too. I like a third tight end here. This is one where if the draft happened today, I would like it to be Jonnu Smith instead of Greg Dulcich personally, just to throw him on the stack with Tua, because I think that they're kind of similar bets, just like I think they have enough talent to potentially be good. I'd rather have the stack there if you had that option. I'm guessing that this draft happened before today, or maybe Jonnu wasn't available. Regardless. So it's if it were today, I would take Jonnu there instead of Greg Dulcich, because I don't think that they're.
Where did Jonnu land? I didn't even see that.
He went to Miami. They just signed him.
So wow,
he'll be fun on Miami stack potentially.
Yeah, they certainly could use him.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? I mean, I really enjoyed this. I'm so thankful that you came on.
Yeah.
We should probably, if you have time, do another one when we get closer into the whole thing. But
sure,
I think a lot of good stuff here, and I really appreciated having you.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. This is always fun. As you said, you like talking high level stuff. I like having these high level conversations also. We're not just talking about specific slates. That's fun also, but it's a different kind of fun. So yeah, thank you for having me on. High level stuff, I would just say content is getting much better around best ball in general. I feel like the conversations are good. So just make sure you're out there listening to what is being said. I know Legendary Upside, I've loved some of the stuff they've put out there. Spike Week has some great content. Spags out there with his splash play. I'm gonna forget some, but there's so much good best ball content out there. I'm starting to do a lot more myself this year. I'm planning on streaming plenty of drafts. So yeah, I don't have any great.
I'd love to come on and do a draft with you.
Yeah, we should do that. Yeah, you should.
I would love that. We could even do an FFPC one when we get closer.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I could break your cherry.
Yeah, show me the ropes on FFPC. That's a good idea. Yeah.
I actually came in this last year. I had more teams get to the final than I ever had before, but none of them sweat. The year before, I came in 4th in the FFPC main. And the year before that 10th. So, I'm knocking on the door on that 200 grand.
Gonna get there. Well, hopefully we can split it this year. We can get that 200 grand.
That would be great. I would be happy to split it with you. Yeah. Neil Orefield at Player Q DFS. Find his podcast if you find him pinned on Twitter, and we will see you soon.